Probably many of you have done our brain imaging experiments where you're lying in an MRI scanner, you're given some task to carry out, and the machine images what part of your brain is active while you carry out that task. And with this method, it's been going on for 30 years or so, we've learnt really a lot of focused things about how the brain works. Here's one example. It happens to be something I'm interested in myself. What I call a thinking network. If you use these sort of simple puzzles like this one, they're often used as intelligence tests. They're very interesting properties. People who do well on these puzzles tend to do better in education. They earn higher salaries. They live longer. What you're supposed to do is to work out which of these down here fills in the empty spot. And if you use those sort of puzzles in the brain scanner, then you end up with this very specific pattern of brain activity, much of it in the frontal lobes just behind your forehead, and accompanying activity elsewhere in the brain. Something it's been repeated hundreds and hundreds of times, that when you give people something complicated to think about, you end up with this particular brain network active. It's obviously important in organising thoughts of many different kinds. It's sometimes called the multiple demand system, simply because it's important in solving problems of many different sorts. So that's a typical experiment. You give people something particular to do. It might be language, it might be recognising faces. You see which bits of the brain are active during that. But today I wanted to show you something else. You can also learn interesting things by a much more exploratory, naturalistic way. That is, giving the person, lying the people in the brain scanner and having them watch movies. And sometimes you find that it's what you would have expected, sometimes completely different. You see how these large-scale brain networks are moving their activity up and down as people walk through their lives, this time watching a movie. So here's the first example. Sometimes you see exactly what you would have expected from the experiments that you already did. So now I'm going to show you over here the activity of this thinking or multiple demand system. The one I told you before is important whenever you're solving problems, in a clip from Inception. So this line here shows you the beginning of the clip where the brain activity is, and then the pink line shows what happens in that thinking system as the clip unfolds. And in Inception, I'm not sure how many of you have seen it, it takes place in the dream world, in fact in multiple levels of dream world. Rather unfortunately, stuff that happens in the dream world in this movie can affect what happens when you wake up again. But now we're in the dream. So it means that this woman here can do weird stuff to the world. Look what happens when she does weird stuff. They've been walking around the street, she and Leonardo DiCaprio. The multiple demand or thinking system is not particularly interested. Its activity is low. We start here. She's just finished walking around in a normal way. Now she's going to mess with the world. Watch. Excuse me. See, now the multiple demand system is going nuts as the world turns out to be a mirror, not a normal world at all. This is what you can do when you're asleep. And now you see it's very, very interesting. And whenever, in fact, there are several clips from Inception where this actress does strange things to the physics of the world, and as you would expect, this problem-solving system shows very high activity. But sometimes it's not like this at all. And in fact, what I want to show you next is we all have this idea of thinking with your head or thinking with your heart. And that difference is really clear in the brain activity during watching movies. So now let's look at a couple of examples of thinking more with your heart. In the next one, it's a bit from Erin Brockovich. Erin Brockovich, as you may or may not know, is a single mother having to cart her kids around while she finds lawyers to sue the big company that's been poisoning her community's neighbourhood for years. They're off to the lawyers in the car, and an argument's broken out with the children. The children are really fed up going around being led to lawyers all the time and having to sit bored in seats while she goes and talks about the law. So an argument is breaking out. Again, look first at the pink one. That's the same thinking system or multiple demand system I told you about before. It's already not really very active while this argument begins, and then I'll show you what happens as the argument progresses. Now this is complicated. You have to understand what it means to be a single mother. You have to understand that children are bored in a hot car and so on. There's a lot of thinking that needs to be done, but now it's thinking with your heart. It's emotional thinking. and watch what happens.
That's behavior I was talking about earlier in the office. No. What's with the attitude? I just need cool, I need quiet.
Multiple demand system hates it. Look over there on the right.
Am I alone in the car? Yes. I said we'll see. I don't want to talk about it right now.
All the other moms.
I don't care what other moms do.
So when can I get a freaking answer?
Hey.
Freaking answer really nails this multiple demand. It does not like it. Meanwhile, I've plotted something else here. The cerebral cortex, as you probably know, expanded rapidly through evolution, and in the human brain it's really reached a size that's not comparable to almost any other animal. But in other parts of the brain, lying deep inside the cortex, are systems which are much more evolutionary ancient. They're shared with vertebrates down to reptiles and amphibians, and probably much more to do with instinctive emotional responses of the sort that we are having when we're dealing with other people. And I've plotted here one of these structures is called the amygdala, and a lot in the dark red is shown activity of the amygdala during this same clip. And you can see as the argument unfolds, the children start cursing their mother. The thinking system goes down, thinking with your head, but the thinking with your heart system in the amygdala is going up in a complementary way. And in fact, if you look across many movie clips, you find that these two tend to be in a push-pull relationship. As one goes up, the other one goes down. I've got one more example I want to show you from Erin Brockovich, because this one is quite cute, and it shows this same thing again. When something emotional happens, the thinking system goes down and the amygdala goes up. Let's look at this one. So now they're in the lawyer's office. The children are bored stiff. They are sitting there waiting for something to happen, and something rather cute does happen. And you can see as they're sitting there, again in pink, the thinking system is going down and the amygdala is about to go up. Bored, bored, bored. Ah. And you see as the sweets come out, up goes the amygdala. So I think this is an example of how you can really see something in movies you wouldn't necessarily be looking for in a focused experiment, this push-pull relationship between, as you might say, thinking with your head and thinking with your heart. I don't have a huge amount of time, but I'm just going to give you one more example of these, how movies can tell you stuff that you perhaps would have been mysterious from many, many years of more focused experiments. And that has to do with this system. Here's the whole brain coloured in different large-scale networks. And this rose colour, it's a great deal of the brain, and it's got a very mysterious property in most brain imaging experiments, which is that it turns off. You set people to do something, it doesn't really matter to a large extent what it is. And in thousands of experiments, one after the other, this large area of the brain just seems to switch off. Now, it cannot possibly be that we've got all this brain that's there to switch off when you do stuff. So it means that we are missing it. And when you look at movies, you can see what it is that we're missing. I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up, and then you'll see a couple of examples. If you imagine yourself in a psychology experiment, the situation is very fixed. You may be dealing with some colours or some words or whatever. Basically, you're in the same room, the same people are around you, it's the same time of day. The broad context of everything around you is fixed. In the real world, this is not what happens. You walk from one room to another, new people come in, you're in a crowded room one time, you're on your own with your children another time. And that big picture of the current overall context is what this rose-coloured network is about. It's often called, for historical reasons, the default mode network, but never really care why. So I'm going to show you something from Star Wars as a first indication of these big context shifts. So at the beginning of this one, it's bad. You know, somebody has just been destroyed by a large monster and is being towed off to be eaten. This region of the default mode network I'm going to plot in activity now doesn't care a bit about that, as you'll see. Oh, no, you won't see unless I actually play it. So now we're plotting a bit of activity in the default mode network, and what we're looking for that big spike. What is it that makes it go nuts in this movie? The timing's perhaps not perfect here. It's actually hard to align timing perfectly because we don't know how quickly the brain responds. So we're taking a bit of a guess, but I've got it as close as I can. Here we go. Monster. Dead animal. Towed away. This default mode system doesn't care in a bit. And then, boom, new place. It really likes shifting to a new place. And this, again, okay, enough. This, again, you can see any one clip is not that persuasive, but if you compare activity in this region of the default mode network with changes in place from across many movie clips, you can see it's a major driver for what's going on. Another part of that default mode network, this is just my last example, it's also interested in changes in people. So of course, as I say, in many situations, the social situation around you is quite fixed, but often it changes. New people come in. And my last clip from Home Alone, where the parents have foolishly got on the plane and left one of their poor children at home, shows you a part of the system that responds when just each time new people come in. So we're in an aeroplane. The spatial situation is quite fixed, but we keep panning to get new people coming in and to look at these little. They're stealing cutlery. Now we're going to the main protagonists at the back, the parents who've left their children.
Don't you feel like a heel flying first class with all the kids back in college?
And now, as these important people come in, that's when this part of the default mode system becomes active. So that was really all I just wanted. Well, I wanted to show you some clips from fun movies, but just to give you a sense of how, when you see, it's the same. Obviously, you can't have people walking around in their lives and being in a brain scanner at the same time. So you miss a lot of this if people are just lying doing a fixed experiment. But by watching movies, you can begin to see how these very large networks in the brain are going up and down in activity as important things happen. And I think I'm done.